Can the Huskers bounce back from another heartbreaker and win big against a traditionally tough matchup? Hi, I'm Aaron Muller, and this is episode 9 of the Cobsmacked Podcast. This is a Nebraska Football podcast where we cover the Husker season and team news as it progresses throughout the year. Every video episode is uploaded to YouTube, and the audio versions can be found on Apple, Google, and Spotify. This week, we're previewing the game 6. It's a Week 5 game against Northwestern Wildcats. The kickoff is at 6:30. It's on the Big Ten Network. And it is at Memorial Stadium. It's our homecoming game to kick off the conference season. Looking at the weather, I'm recording on Wednesday. The weather says it's supposed to rain during the day pretty consistently throughout the day, but it should let off by kickoff. That's always subject to change, but for the most part, it should be dry. It is supposed to be mid-60s and getting colder as it gets through the night, obviously. So if there's any kind of breeze, that could prove to be a little chilly for some of the players. Northwestern is a part of the Big Ten West as we are. They are the reigning Big Ten West champions from last year, led by Pat Fitzgerald. He's their head coach. He has been their head coach since 2006. He has a 63-61 Big Ten record, so he's pretty even. He has a lot of high years, then he kind of slips back down, which is kind of the case this year. He is 5-5 against Nebraska, so this would be the tiebreaker. Hopefully we come out ahead, but we'll get into this. He was a player at Northwestern in the 90s. He was a linebacker. He's actually inducted into their Hall of Fame as a player. He was very good. So because of that, he is a very defensive-minded head coach, which that's typically what Northwestern is known for. They're known for their defense. They're known for keeping games close. They're also known for being very disciplined. They don't beat themselves, so you have to beat them, which is kind of our kryptonite the last few years. But getting into their offense, they do tend to run it a lot. They're run-heavy offense, but they have had a lot of roster turnover, not just on the offensive side, just as a team in general. So they deal with that. They have been averaging 25.8 points per game, roughly 388 yards per game, which isn't like super high, but that's not what Northwestern is known for either. Like I mentioned, their defensive team, they're trying to keep the score down, not so much score a ton of points. Nebraska's defense at the moment, so I seen a stat. The stat is actually like 19 points per game, but that's including special teams blunders. So the defense itself has allowed 13 points per game, which would put them in the top 10. So I don't think the defense is going to have a hard time keeping their offense in check, but you never know. Their sophomore quarterback, Ryan Helinski, he was named the starter this week over their senior quarterback, Hunter Johnson. Johnson had been the quarterback coming into the season, but he had a few turnovers this season already, and I think that they're trying to just get somebody in there to be more consistent. Helinski doesn't seem to be a playmaker. It wasn't so much that he won the job from Johnson. It seemed more like Johnson lost the job because of his turnovers and because of his poor game management. So that seems to be the role that Helinski's going to come in and be. He's going to be the game manager that doesn't make mistakes, hopefully. That's what they're hoping for. That's all they really need him for. They're going to focus on the run game. Going into the run game, the offensive line, the right side itself seems veteran, like that right tackle, right guard, center position seems veteran, but the depth behind them and then on the left side is still young guys. Most of them are under 300 pounds. Some of the backups were like 310, 305, but all of the starters were under 300, but they were all 6'4" and up. They're all still big guys, comparatively, but they're not as big as we have gone against. So I wonder if that's going to play a role in our defensive line still being able to cut through like we have been. Watching their previous games, they are prone to collapse. I don't know if it's because they have some transfers in there or because they have some guys that maybe didn't have a ton of play time. But it seems like the pocket doesn't stay pretty solid. It's similar to ours. It seems to collapse. The quarterback seems to have to scramble, and he's not known for that. Either Helinski or Johnson, neither one of them is really a scrambling quarterback. So that should play a role in the game as well. They do occasionally run Wildcat offense with their other quarterback. He comes in, and I think he might even be a running back at this point on their offense. But they bring in, multiple running backs, and whoever the ball gets snapped to, it takes off. So that's something we'll have to watch out for. Getting into the notable players, most of the wide receivers seem matched. They had like 3 guys that were within like 20 yards of each other as far as total yardage goes. But they kind of hit all 3 of these guys pretty evenly. Nobody was really far ahead of anybody else. They did seem undersized. I don't think any of them were over 6 foot, but they seemed solid. They had good hands. They were making catches that were pretty difficult to hold on to through the play, but they were making the plays. There's junior Malik Washington, sophomore Bryce Kurtz, and graduate Stephon Robinson Jr. I think Robinson might be a transfer, but he seems to be doing well this year already. So those 3 guys, none of them are going to like pop out at you, but it's a team effort as far as the wide receiver core goes. So I wouldn't be surprised if you hear those 3 names consistently on Saturday. The running back, sophomore Evan Hull, he, from my perspective, he wasn't very shifty. He wasn't like gonna juke you out or anything like that, but I would call him more of like a speedy fullback. He's a bigger guy. He's short, but he's like hulky. He's bulky. I would call him a speedy fullback. He seems like more likely to try to run you over than he does try to go around you. So that's something we'll have to focus on tackling and getting him down. Last week we didn't have issues bringing down Walker, so I hope we don't have issues bringing down Evan Hull. They do run a little bit different offensive movement, but we'll get into that a little bit later too. Heading over the defense, they have a new coordinator. Their last coordinator had like 44 years of coaching experience. He's kind of a legend at Northwestern. But this new guy coming in, he played at Northwestern. He had some assistant coaching experience here, and then he went to the NFL. So Pat Fitzgerald brought him in. He doesn't seem like he's going to change the scheme at all. They're still going to be running a 4-3. It's kind of a mix of a 4-3. They do like to run cover 4, where they have 2 back safeties, 2 deep safeties. So they'll have the 4 down linemen, and then they'll have 1 linebacker that seems to stick forward. So they have 5 guys watching the run game, and then they have basically man-on-man coverage on the outside, but they're not man-on-man so much as they are zone. They're not going to run with the cornerbacks and stick with them very much unless they're running through the zone and the ball gets thrown to them. So that might prove to be a little more difficult for Adrian. He can't just assume that the matchup he sees right there is the matchup that's going to be there when the ball gets to the receiver. Their safeties are able to get over there. One of them in specific we'll get to later. He's very good at ball hawking. He sees the play before the quarterback lets go of the ball, and he can be there. He'll just be there at any point. So that's something they got to have to take into consideration. Their defense is allowing 24.7 points per game. It's not the typical Northwestern defense that we're used to, where it's a shutout game. But Nebraska's offense is averaging 27.6 points per game. So their average not being so low and our average not being so high kind of lends me to believe that this is going to favor Nebraska a little bit here. Their defense just isn't what it used to be. It isn't what it typically is, which, like I said, Pat Fitzgerald goes through these seasons where he has a really good season, and then it kind of digresses as people leave and transfer out and stuff. Their defensive line does seem veteran. They have a lot of guys that are seniors and graduates and juniors. But behind that, their secondary and their cornerbacks are young, and their linebackers, even though they are upperclassmen as well, their linebackers seem to make a lot of bad reads on the run, like which holes they're going to go through, and they take bad angles. There was a couple times where the quarterback, I think it was the Duke game I was watching, the quarterback was rolling out to the right, and the linebacker just took a bad angle, and the quarterback was able to skirt up for a first down. The defensive line, though, could cause issues. Being veteran, being big, being aggressive, they could cause issues because our offensive line, as we have experienced for the last 4 weeks, has been not great, specifically on the edges. It seemed more like they weren't so much edge rushers as they were just trying to punch right through the middle and disrupt the quarterback immediately. But they're able to get pushed. They're able to get pressure. So we'll have to see how our offensive line deals with that. But like I mentioned, this isn't the defense we're used to seeing. They still hold back. Like I mentioned, they have those 2 deep safeties quite a bit. They're not opposed to letting you have these short passes open. The cornerbacks playing that zone that they do, they back up, they play the zone. They're almost allowing you to get this short yardage, kind of tempting your quarterback to make these out route passes over and over and over again. They would rather you have a long sustained drive than have big chunk plays. They're tempting your quarterback to make these passes consistently on the assumption that most quarterbacks can't make those passes consistently to the out. And like I said, their safeties are pretty good at running up on the ball, pretty good at figuring out where the ball is going to go. But Their corners are not as experienced as they typically have been in the past. So the screen pass and the play actions are going to be very effective because, like I said, they leave those short passes open. There's a lot of pocket room on those outside routes. So one thing I did notice when they were playing against Duke, so all the other quarterbacks I watched them play against, they weren't really mobile, but the Duke quarterback seemed to be able to scramble, not as much as Adrian can, not as elusively as he could, but he was able to move. And that gave them a lot of issues. Like I mentioned, the linebackers were making bad reads on whether to go for the quarterback or whether to go for the running back that was running the wheel route. It was just a bad day for the defense against a mobile quarterback, and he wasn't even on the what's the word, tier that Adrian is. Adrian is kind of in a league on his own right now with how elusive he is. And he can still hurt you with his arm. It's not like he's all legs. He can still hurt you with his arm. So this kind of fits Adrian to have a good game. This between having the short passes, the screen passes, the option should work really well in this scheme where the linebackers are going to have to make a decision, and Adrian's pretty good about making the right decision in those scenarios. So I can see the option being a big thing and play action being a big thing as well. It's all going to kind of come down to the offensive line. Notable players on the defense, they have a senior, Chris Bergen. He's a linebacker. He leads the team in tackles. The linebacker core as a whole is kind of solid. They all lead the team in tackles. I think the top 3 tacklers on their team are all linebackers. But like I said, they often misread the defense. So they're making tackles, but they're not making them as early as they could. And a lot of times it's taking 3 or 4 guys to get there to bring them down. Their tackling across the board was pretty bad. It seemed like they were going high on a lot of guys trying to like check the ball out or something, but they weren't bringing guys down on the first guy. So another guy to look at is sophomore Brandon Joseph. He's their safety. He had 6 interceptions last year as a freshman. He already has 1 this year and 1 fumble recovery. He is the guy I was kind of mentioning as the ball hawk. He has a good feel for the ball and where it's going to go. He hasn't had as much success this year, but like I mentioned, the whole defense is kind of struggling. So once they kind of get a rhythm going, I can see him being an issue, especially if Adrian's going to have some struggles with the offensive line not giving him time. This guy's going to be able to go up and make plays. Special teams is kind of how it always is with Northwestern. Their punter and their kicker are both graduate seniors. The punt average is 40 plus yards, so they're pretty consistent on their punt unit. That seems to be one thing that, like I mentioned, that the games are always really close with Northwestern, and they're decided by like a field goal or a touchdown. And field position always plays a big role in this Northwestern series. So the fact that they have a punter that's going to average 40 yards per kick, and their kicker is 5 of 7 for field goals this season. He's, again, really consistent. They both have experience. They're both going to come into this game and not have an issue. Getting into the keys of the game, as usual, the offensive line is going to be my first key. There is a little bit of a shakeup. Frost said at his Monday conference that there is going to be a shakeup in the line. It's kind of an open competition. I don't imagine Juergens is going to lose his starting spot because he's like the soul of the offensive line at the moment. But he said every other position is pretty much open for competition. Whoever the best guy is going to get the job. He directly said the left guard and the right tackle. I think both tackles are going to be pretty open for a new guy to step in there if he's willing to fight for it. One of the stats I thought was really crazy was that we have a top 25 offense and basically a top 10 defense. But we are where we are because of our special teams and our offensive line. We have a top 25 offense, despite having the worst ranked offensive line in like 5 categories between pressure on the quarterback, being able to hold the run blocks, things like that. We have the worst graded offensive line in FBS out of 130 teams, 128 teams. We have the worst graded offensive line, yet we still have a top 25 offense. Can you imagine if we had even a fairly decent offensive line, how good this team could be? We could easily be 5-0. Easily, with the offense and the potential that we have there, if we can just get the offensive line to play more solidly and more disciplined, we wouldn't even be having a conversation about the offensive line. The biggest critique is the red zone offense, that we get down to the red zone, we get to where we can score a touchdown, but then we kind of don't have anywhere to go with it. The more I kind of listen to the coaches and stuff, that sounds like that's because all the defense is really compacted into that 15, 20-yard area as opposed to being spread out through the field. There's no real deep threat because all of the field is mushed down in the red zone. So if you're not able to run the ball, if you're not able to get push off the line, it's really hard to score in the red zone because you can't rely on just passing when there's so many defenders cramped in that area. You're going to throw picks like we seen last week. But if you're not able to run the ball, it makes it very hard to score. So if we can get the offensive line to where we're getting the push that we expect from these big, strong guys, we should be able to score and punch it in more often. I fully expect to see Teddy Prochaska in there somewhere. Teddy Prochaska, I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. I fully expect to see him in there. He seemed like he was a guy. He came in at tight end position a couple times, but just his ability to block, even just as a tight end, he wants to be on the field. He wants to fight for the team. He wants to be helpful and help the line where he can. I can certainly see him coming in. He's not going to redshirt this year at this point, but I can see him coming in and making a difference right away. Maybe not mistake-free, maybe not perfectly, but he's going to make a difference because he's willing to fight. I just hope to see dudes that fight, and they want the push. They want to try. Imagine seeing 5 Cam Jurgens. You'd just be able to run behind 5 dudes that are pushing their dudes 30 yards downfield. That would be incredible. I would go for 5 Cam Jurgens. Special teams is going to be the second key. Northwestern has the second most punt yard return in the FBS right now. I think they were averaging like 23 yards per return on the punt. And like I said, field position is going to play a huge role here. Our punters have been struggling both in getting it to go where they want it to go and getting it to go far. So that combined with the fact that they have return guys that are capable of making yardage count is going to be an issue. In the tight game, we also need the field goals to count. Something interesting that I heard this week. So Jojo Doman was on a podcast, or I think he does like a weekly podcast, and he brought Connor Culp on this week. And I hear a lot of people they were crucifying Connor Culp. Garrett Nelson made that comment that we're kind of crucifying Connor Culp for missing these things. I thought something was going on. I thought maybe he was hurt or something. But during the podcast, he did mention that he had a mental struggle this year. And not so much spiraled off of him missing kicks consistently, but just there was something going on behind the scenes, like mentally for him, where he was having trouble with something. He said he didn't like football anymore. He didn't want to play football anymore. He said whether he made it or he missed, he didn't have a feeling. There was no feeling there. The only feeling he really ever felt was when he missed a big one, a crucial field goal, and he let the team down. He felt that, which just led him to spiral down more. But I think that takes and he made the comment too, it makes a big. He didn't want to go get help. He knew that there was something wrong, but he didn't want to go get help because he doesn't want to be seen as a head case, a head basket. So he finally sucked it up after the Oklahoma game where he felt a lot of responsibility there. He went and got help after that, and he feels better. JoJo said the same thing. He looks better. He kind of overcame it. He took it as a challenge to himself to overcome it. And so he feels confident moving forward. Getting to the third key of the game, the discipline and the mistakes in the game have to be managed well. 8 out of the 10 games we've had in the past with Northwestern have been decided by one score. A lot of those have been field goals. Some of those have ended in Hail Marys. I remember Fitzgerald mentioned that in his press conference that he can't remember necessarily what happened in the last 2 years, but he does remember at some point there was a Hail Mary that really crushed him. And that's kind of how it goes. Northwestern plays us close. We play well there. They play well here. So as I mentioned, they're typically well coached and disciplined. It's a little bit closer this year. They have been making mistakes. I think it's because of the amount of transfers they have in, the amount of rollover they have. They have guys that just aren't gelling well together yet, so they're having a little bit of communication errors and discipline errors. It's 41 penalty yards per game on their side compared to our 51 per game. We need to clean that up as well. The 51 is still really high. We have a lot of offensive issues that are coming off the line. Last week we had the 4 offensive false starts from the offensive line, and that stuff needs to be cleared up. So I'm hoping and that is something. So Scott Frost in his Monday presser mentioned that he was in the offensive line meeting this week, and he was with the special teams meeting this week. And he's been focusing on those 2 areas. As a coach, he said that when there's an area that needs attention, he goes to those areas with attention. So I'm hoping that the talk they had, it sounded pretty brutal. It sounded like it was kind of a gut check to these guys that you guys are kind of making the team lose right now. So I'm hoping that kind of slaps some guys in the face, and they have either 2 directions. Either they get better or they give up. So it sounds like they're working on getting better. So if we can get the penalty yards cleaned up and play a clean game of football, I think it'll be a much better experience for us. And Northwestern, as I mentioned, they're typically disciplined. I think 41 penalty yards is a little misleading. They typically don't make mistakes in crucial moments. So something else I wanted to notice, some mistakes. Adrian Martinez is going to have a lot on his shoulders anyway. He always does. He's been kind of pulling the offense himself. Not to say that nobody else is playing a part in that, but without Adrian, I can't imagine our offense working as well as it does around the issues that we have, specifically the offensive line. But 6 of the last 13 games that Northwestern has played, they have multiple picks by their defense. As I mentioned, the one safety, Brandon Joseph, he had 6 interceptions last year. So, I mean, if Adrian does make mistakes, Northwestern is going to capitalize on them. They are prone to punching the ball out and ripping the ball out and making interceptions. So Adrian's just going to have to be very careful with protecting the football and not making risky passing decisions. There's going to be plenty of open things. He doesn't need to push things and make things happen because that's kind of what they're tempting you to do. So getting into the expectations and thoughts for the game, Northwestern is struggling this year. It's a down year for them. They kind of have those. They lost against both of the FBS teams that they played. So they played against Duke and they played against Michigan State. They lost both of those games. They were closer games than the games that they've won. The games that they won, they both have been against FCS opponents, and they won them pretty convincingly. But you expect that from like a Big Ten team going to play an FCS team, you expect them to win those games. But the 2 games that they should have been hanging in, they just didn't. They played Michigan State close, but I think Duke beat them pretty convincingly. Nebraska is 10-9 at home, but they are 7-3 in these homecoming games, so I hope that plays a role. I know that Memorial Stadium is going to be loud because of the homecoming experience. The student section is going to be loud, and I hope that plays a role for Northwestern that they haven't necessarily. Northwestern doesn't have a huge stadium. A lot of places don't have a huge stadium like we do, so I'm hoping that if it's loud and it's an atmosphere that they're not used to being in, that it might cause issues like we have had in the past few weeks. The defense could have a huge game this week. If they shut down the run game, as I mentioned, their running back is able to run you over and get open when he has these holes. But if they're able to shut it down like they did last week against Walker, then you're going to force Helinski to pass. And as I mentioned, he didn't come in. He's not starting this game because he won the quarterback job. He's coming in as more of a safety net, so that they don't make mistakes. But if you force a sophomore quarterback to come in and throw it around more than he's used to in an aggressive environment, then he's going to probably make mistakes. And that's something we need to capitalize on. We had a lot of balls hit our defenders' hands and they drop them. We need to start picking those off. And I think if we can shut the run game down, which is what they lean on the most, and force their quarterback to make passes that he's not used to making, we have a big opportunity there. As I mentioned, it's going to be a loud environment, and it's going to be there's just going to be mistakes for a first-time starter at Northwestern. The team had 5 turnovers against Duke, and Duke is only the 98th ranked overall defense. So if Duke can get a bunch of turnovers, there's no saying that we couldn't, as good of a defense as we have. Pat Fitzgerald has a lot of praise for Nebraska this year, specifically our last game. He said that defensive performance was probably the best one he's ever seen. But Chenander handled that well. It sounded almost like Pat Fitzgerald. I know he loves the game of football and stuff, but the amount of praise that he was giving specific players and then Nebraska as a whole, it sounded almost like he's trying to fluff us up so that we come into this game, a little softer than we would have anyway. But Chenander handled this well. He said, praise and blame, it's all the same. That's something you hear from the defensive players quite a bit. Praise and blame, it's all the same. It doesn't matter if it's critical of you. You need to kind of throw that away and just focus on your game. Same thing goes for positive stuff. If it's too positive and you're kind of fluffing yourself up and you're stroking your ego a little too much, then you're going to make mistakes as well. So he said thanks for the compliment, but he really wants to focus on the game and the game plan at hand. As he does, he expects that from his players as well. Getting into the final prediction, the spread as of right now is 11.5. I believe it opened at 8, but it's like slowly growing throughout the week in Nebraska's favor. Over and under is 50.5. If the weather plays a role in it, I can see it easily going under that over and under of 50. But I think the game's going to be a lot more smoothly run than the last few have been. I feel like we are tired of losing these close games, so we need to make a big statement, especially on the offensive side of the ball. So I have the prediction set at 38-17 Nebraska. If the Nebraska defense can continue to dominate the run, if the Black Shirts can continue to shut down the run game, I don't see Northwestern scoring often. That's kind of their bread and butter. They have to establish that run game to be able to make these passes to the receivers. If they can't get the run game going, he's going to be forced to throw it more often, which he's going to make mistakes. Maybe the changeup on the offensive line can cause issues, but it also could spark the offense. It could spark them into making more sustainable drives and more disciplined drives. Adrian Martinez is elusive, and I can see a lot of play action and option plays working in this game. I can see a lot of those being called, and then Adrian's legs are going to get us a lot of first downs, get us a lot of chunk plays, and that's going to open up the run game and the short passes to the tight ends as well. I can easily imagine us scoring 17 or more points going into halftime. Memorial Stadium is going to be loud. It's going to be pumped. It's going to be a great atmosphere, and it's going to be a night game. So I can easily see us taking this momentum and going forward with it, and I'm choosing to see how that goes. Our downfall the past few weeks is that there's been like 1 or 2 or 3 key plays that have given the other team the opportunity to take the game away from us. We've allowed the game to slip away. But if we get ahead by enough and we get more comfortable with it, then that allows the defense to kind of solidify up and hold off the team. And especially if most of the points can come in the first half, I can see the offense not feeling so much pressure, and they're not going to make mistakes. They're just going to be kind of settle into a rhythm, and then they're still going to be able to score, but it won't be as urgent as it would be if it was a 1-score game as it has been. So if we can get ahead by a couple scores and then hold on to that lead throughout the game, that would be ideal for us. If we want to reach a bowl game, we need to win these winnable games. We have Northwestern coming up. We have Michigan coming up. Michigan's not like necessarily a winnable game, but then you have like Purdue coming in. You need to win these winnable games so that you can try to win one of these harder games to get to the bowl game. You need to start with Northwestern. We need to be able to beat a team that is wounded currently. I would say Northwestern is wounded, and you need to be able to take that team out. So that'll wrap up this week's preview. We will be back here on Sunday for a recap of the game. How are you feeling halfway through the season? We're almost halfway through the season. Are you feeling optimistic? Are you losing hope? Are you feeling more hope because of the way that the team has been playing? Leave a comment below on the video, or you can find me on Twitter at Cobsmacked Pod and message me on there. I do stream on Twitch, but we'll see how that goes. So until next time, go Big Red.